In this video, I'll be doing a tutorial on how to make an expandable enemy that you could use to build up your project. It's really easy to expand on, and it's pretty easy to set up. And while I'm testing this game, if you see any features that you'd like to get a tutorial on, please leave a comment below. And I'm just using a project I previously worked on because I think it'll be easier to visualize everything built together. So as you can see, these two nodes, or three nodes right here, they're all what I would call components. And these basically mean they're just resources almost, but they're in the form of nodes. So in Godot 4, you can easily use export variables to get references of nodes. And that's what these components use. So I can just, if I pretend I want to make an enemy that shoots lasers instead of its mouth, instead of using a knife, I would just add a character body, a timer, a mesh instance, so I actually see what the character is, a collision shape, and that's literally it. And I can just Control Shift A, add whatever components I need, and it's ready to go. I would only have to add the extra features. And doing this, it's really easy to create new ideas and just test them. So to begin with an enemy you want to create, you want to add a character body and just add a timer. I'll tell you what this is used for later. And then the second step, as you see over here, I have a folder called Autoloads. And basically, sorry, I'm just going to delete this. And basically, Autoloads are a script that you can reference from anywhere in your game without having like a path to like a node of the script. To create an autoload, you're gonna add a script. You're gonna call it whatever you like. For me, I called it player manager. You have a new script, but that's not all you need to do. You need to set the path to the autoload in your project settings. So I can go find the script and I can press add and now I can reference it throughout my entire game. Okay, so now I'll have a variable called player, and as this comment says, it's a reference to the player for the entire game. So like any node can use this player reference. But obviously this needs to be set. It's not going to just randomly know what the player is. So in whatever like the main world is, so like this is called the field. This is like a little game I'm working on. The only line of code I have really is one on function ready. I'm literally just gonna set player manager dot player equal to a direct path of player. And this shouldn't change that much. So if you're like pretend you're going like from scene to scene, all you gotta do is just like make a one node, set the path, and that's it. So it's pretty easy. That's really the only step you have to do to get the like a path to the player throughout your entire game. Okay, anyways, you're gonna wait 0 0.5 seconds just to make sure everything is ready. And if you don't, some reason it causes an error. I think it's to do with the function ready and which nodes spawn in first. But just in case, you're gonna add a timer. You can set it to like a really low amount. It doesn't really matter. Like you could do like a tenth of a second. It doesn't really matter. Anyways, you're gonna you're gonna want to create a mesh instance so you can see what the enemy looks like, and you're gonna add a collision shape. And make sure when you add a collision shape, you don't click any of these options because these they really don't work well. They're really only used for like structures that are not moving, 'cause then they they just they just don't work with collisions well. I don't know how to explain it, but it just don't use it. Okay, anyway, so you have a mesh instance, you have a collision shape, and now we can work on our components. So what you want to do is you want to add a navigation agent 3D. You don't have to make it, and then you want to add you want to save this as a scene. So you right click and then save branch as scene and save it. And then in that scene, make sure you're in that in in like the navigation agent 3D scene and not in the enemy scene, because if you add a script here, it will not save to the actual scene. So you add a script, and this is a lot of code, I know, but it's pretty simple. Basically, you want to use these new Godot 4 syntaxes. They're not really new anymore, but whatever. Okay, so you want to export the main node, which I say is the actual character body. Um, the manager, which we'll work on next, that's the other component. And then a Hurtbox collision shape, which is the other component. So there's three components we'll be going over. They're basically only two, because the Hurtbox isn't that long. Okay, and you want to have a variable called reach target, and that's going to be equal to true, just in case you spawn exactly near the player. Okay, so function ready, you want the target desired distance equal to the Hurtbox collision shape radius, and this is because um this is essentially when the enemy can actually attack the player. So if like the player is outside of here, the enemy will never be able to attack the player. And you could set that later when we go over how to make the Hurtbox. But for now, just maybe include the line because you already have uh, a reference to a Hurtbox. Okay, anyways, you're gonna wanna make sure you go on the actual scene of navigation agent, and you're gonna add a signal of target reached to the script. And in this function, you want to set reach target equal to true. This is gonna be kind of like the first component is gonna be hard to understand what's really happening because we don't have all the other components built. But just trust me on this. We're gonna have we're gonna basically set an entity state, which we'll go over later, and we're gonna make sure that we're not moving while we're attacking, unless you want that, of course. And then in the physics process is where we're gonna actually be moving. So if we have the player set, we're gonna set the target position equal to the player's global position. And if the dart tar the sorry, if the distance to the target is greater than the desired distance, then we're gonna find a way to get to the target. And this is what we have to do. So reach target is gonna be false, because obviously if the distance to target is greater than the target desired distance, we're not near the enemy. I mean the player. And we're just gonna set the entity state, which we'll go over later again, to chase. So if reach target equals false, we're gonna get our current location, and then we're gonna get the next location, which is an inbuilt method called the get next path position. And then we're gonna create a new velocity which is going to subtract our two locations and get the distance and normalize it. And then we're going to multiply it by our speed, which I set in manager, which is a different component. And then we're going to set velocity to new velocity. And this is also a method in navigation agent. Okay, so basically now we know where the navigation agent wants to go. So obviously in this function on velocity computed, this only appears, or this is only triggered if you have set velocity, if you use this method, and it will compute a safe velocity, and that is the velocity we want to move to. So since a navigation agent 3D does not have its own velocity, we're going to use the main node, which is set to the character body 3D of the enemy. And we're going to set that velocity equal to, we're basically going to tell it the velocity to move a certain direction. And then we're going to call move and slide on our actual character body. And of course, we can't forget the gravity. And the main.gravity is something you can define in your actual character. So like, it's better not to have it defined in manager or like a predefined gravity, because perhaps you want to have an enemy that's flying, right? You don't want it to be falling towards the ground when it's trying to fly. Okay, and we're gonna multiply that by delta so it's actually smooth. And that's really it for the navigation agent. And then on the enemy manager, this is where most of the stuff happens. So you're gonna create a normal node. It doesn't really matter. You can use a node 3D too. And you're gonna save it as a save branch as scene. And you're gonna open the scene, and you're gonna add another script. And you're also gonna add a timer. It's gonna be for the attack speed of the enemy. And as you can see, there's like a lot of variables. If you want, you could use like a JSON file or something to configure it. But for me, I do not mind just looking in the inspector and just setting these all to whatever um, values I prefer. Okay, so we're gonna have a reference to the navigation agent, which we just created, the main node, which is the character body, and the Hurtbox, which we haven't created yet, but just still include the line. Okay, and then we're gonna create a variable for the speed, the health, the damage, the knockback resistance, and 1.0 is the lowest, the attack speed, acceleration, and in a future tutorial I can show you guys how to do XP, but we won't have enough time for this video. Okay, and you're gonna want to have a Boolean variable, which is can attack, which will be default set to true. And you want to have a reference to your timer. Okay. Over here, you're going to have a enum, which is basically a variable with, or it's not the correct definition, but a simplified version would be like a variable with 3 set, like predefined values. So by default, or actually, we're gonna create a export variable called entity state, and that's what we changed in navigation agent. And by default, it's gonna be idle. And for knockback movement, we're gonna have can move and is knockback, and those are gonna be booleans. So in function knockback, we're gonna have impulse, which is just a class, and basically I don't think I even included it yet in my project, but it's gonna use the impulse origin, which is basically the position the impulse came from. So if I'm the player and I attack the enemy, the player's location will be the impulse origin. Uh, and then we're gonna subtract like well we're gonna set the character body's velocity equal to the enemy's position minus the the impulse's origin. Then we're gonna normalize it and then multiply that by the knockback force, which is something in the impulse class, and I'll quickly go over that. So I might have actually included it. Yeah, okay, I did. Okay, so all it is you create a new script, you replace whatever extends script or what extends node, right, with class name and then impulse. And then you want to create two variables, impulse origin, which will be a vector3, and knockback force, which is a float. And that's what you would pass through the function. So if I hit up an enemy, the player would call knockback on that enemy. And then you would pass in a new class or a new impulse that you create. And I can show you guys an example probably in the description because I do not have time for this video. Anyways, we're gonna okay, yeah, so the main part is since we have components, we need to make them all work like really smoothly without any problems because we can't directly control the navigation agent 3D with main with our enemy manager because perhaps we don't want a navigation agent. It would just mess up the entire thing. So we need to set the navigation agent target position to basically where the enemy is at the moment and basically just stops the agent from moving and it basically just makes it so the velocity won't be added on towards the player so it cancels out the knockback almost. Um and we're gonna set is knockback equal to true. And we're gonna do what I said before. We're just gonna do we're gonna set the velocity equal to this like I guess calculation and you're gonna set the velocity dot y, you're gonna add towards it. So even if the enemy is falling down, it's flying, it'll still get affected by knockback. So in the class impulse, you have knockback force, and you're gonna divide that by knockback resistance, which is a variable we defined earlier. And you're gonna set can move equal to false. Okay, so in the physics process, um, basically just avoid errors. If there is no player set, you're just gonna return, so you're just gonna skip everything else. And then over here we have match, which is basically you match the variable to one of these like numbers, I guess. So if entity state is okay, well, I guess I should explain that enum is basically numbers, but they just have like um they look like they're a word, but the real value is a number. So we're gonna so basically all this does is it says if the entity state is equal to 0, then we're gonna say can move equals true, and this is if the enemy is idle. And the only reason I included this is because perhaps you wanna like have an idle animation, or like just make the enemy wander around if it's not chasing the player. And then if the enemy is chasing the player, which is 1, it's gonna set can move equal to true. And we do this because if the enemy is attacking, which is 2, right? It sets can move equal to false, so it won't move while attacking the enemy. And I think it's just like a good balance. Of course, you don't have to actually do that. And if you can attack, and the hurt box, which we'll go over in a second, is overlapping, like over basically if a player is in the area 30, then we're gonna set can attack equal to false, so we can attack multiple times in like a millisecond. We're gonna deal damage to the to the player, which is a variable in main, and then we're gonna start the timer with the attack speed. The semicolon is basically just grouping 2 lines of codes into one. It's kind of pointless, but we're gonna wait until the timer times out. So once it reaches 0, we're gonna set can attack equal to true, and then we're gonna set the entity state back to idle to reset everything. So we're gonna double check if we can attack again, and we're gonna double check if we can chase again. Um, Over here, you just have a deal damage player. So you're just gonna update its health with whatever function your player has to update its health. And you want to have a update health function for the enemy itself. And when you call this method or function on the enemy, you just gotta pass in the damage. And all you gotta do is subtract the damage from the health. And then if the health is less than or equal to 0, you're gonna basically just remove the enemy completely from the scene. And once again, I'll go over this XP thing later on, maybe in a different video. Okay, so now finally we're gonna add the hurt box. So all you gotta do is add a um area 3D, same thing as before. Save branch as a scene, open the scene, add a script, and like there's like 2 lines of code basically. You just gotta have a reference to the manager node. You're gonna have a variable called, I don't even know if I use that anymore. Yeah, I don't think I use that anymore. Okay, player overlapping is gonna be the variable we use. So we're gonna connect 2 signals, body entered and body exited, to the script. And all it's gonna do is if the body is in a group called player, which is my way of detecting if it's the player. If your game uses something else, it's totally fine. We're gonna set the entity state equal to an attacking state. So it knows the enemy should attack instead of chasing. And then we're gonna set the player overlapping equal to true. Um, and then if the body exits and it's in a group called player, we're gonna set the entity state equal to 1. I don't know why I actually used 1 here, but that's basically chase. Let me just change that. Okay. So that's basically it. So if I to show you guys how easy it is to make a new enemy, all I literally have to do is just create character body, and I just have to add all the components. So, oops, did not mean to do that. Okay, and I just fill in all these variables and stuff, add a mesh instance, a collision shape, and then of course I forgot to mention this, but you gotta add a collision shape to the actual hurtbox, and usually you want to make it uh, a sphere, and you can just set it to literally whatever you want, which is why we set in navigation, we set the target radius or the target distance equal to the the radius of this collision shape. So, and that's literally it. Like I can fill this out and create a new player or a new enemy just like that. And then I would add the extra details, like if I want lasers shooting through my mouth, I would just add that on top of this. And it's so much easier to create a new enemy instead of copying down code, modifying it. It's just way easier. I'm not gonna save that, and I'll show you guys what happens. So I have, let me just turn off my debug. So pretty cool enemy chasing me. You can see like the path it's following. And there's actually one thing I forgot to mention. This actually happened to me. I was kind of stuck on this, but you want to head over to like your actual scene, and you want to add, where is it? I can't find it. Okay, yeah, a navigation region 3D, and literally all you have to do for this is click on the mesh, right? You want to click a mesh at the top right here, and you create navigation mesh. That's literally it, and it automatically creates it for you. And like I can do it on this one. Create navigation mesh. And the player follows me. You can see it'll do damage to me. At the top left, that's my health bar. They'll group up. And additional settings for the navigation agent is you want to make sure you have avoidance on. That way they don't bump into each other. And then just in my opinion, I like having debug on. And you can just mess with some of these settings. Obviously these don't. The target distance doesn't matter because you're gonna set that anyways. But like the path desired distance you can change. Most of these you can change. You can change all of like mostly avoidance. I do believe that um sorry, I just blanked out. If you guys want to quickly look at how I spawn in the enemies, it's not really hard. I have a reference to the player, right? And then I set a minimum and maximum for each value. So like I can change this to like a 1, I can do like 30, I don't really care. But in the area around me, right? This is gonna be like the units in Godot, right? So I'm gonna on a wave timeout, I have a timer here, right? So this is like what I call my timer. And on timeout, um I'm gonna call randomize to make sure everything is random. It's kind of weird how that works, but I'm gonna restart my timer, and I have my enemy preload, which is like the scene almost, and I'm gonna instance that scene, add the enemy to this node, and all I'm gonna do is I'm gonna uh, make this the enemy's position, equal to the player's position, but then add a randomized number through the range I set, and it's gonna spawn it in randomly. So as you can see, there's one that spawns in automatically, but any second now. Yeah, see how one spawns, and 5 seconds after, another one will spawn randomly. If you want like a more complex version, and if you want to see a tutorial on how to make this gun or the sniper, um, just tell me in the comments, like the video, subscribe. I'll definitely do that. And you guys can, and I can show you guys how to make a flying enemy, like a more complicated navigation system, so the enemies can only enter or exit certain parts of the map. And I can even show you guys how to make recoil, bloom, all that good stuff, like this crosshair you see. And I can do sprinting, like a sprint bar, stamina. There's I'm just telling you guys, there's a lot of things I could do if you guys want me to. Anyways, thank you for watching this video.